What's going on, Summoners? Welcome back to another episode of ProGuides OP Pick or Ban, now on patch 11.11. Our Challenger analysts think that these are the champions that are a bit overtuned for one reason or another, so they have the power to affect your games more than they otherwise should. In light of that, you'll either want to deny their existence altogether, or more likely secure them for your team. And also don't forget that if you're more interested in looking for the champs to play that are less contested, you can also check out our top 3 champs to main series. The champs in those videos are still strong enough to carry with, but they're lower in both pick rate and ban rate, meaning that you're more likely to actually get your hands on them. Alright, regardless, let's get into the video.
We'll start things off in the top lane with Shen. Ever since his ultimate buff, he's been a safe and consistent pick, able to win or at least go even in pretty much every single lane. If he doesn't already win the 1v1 matchup, he will eventually outscale most opponents, being able to pick up a mix of tanky and offensive stats, and can usually take over the game as a pretty dominant side laner in the mid to late game. Once you become that strong side lane threat, you're able to constantly pick apart the enemy team as they struggle to find the right play to deal with you. Since you're stacking up a lot of armor in most matchups, you can even dive most champs that try to hold you under their tower. The enemy's then left with 2 options: send multiple members to deal with you, or force a fight on the other side of the map to get your ult. If they send multiple members to you, you can use your taunt to dash out over a wall and escape the threat. Or if you're in a pinch, you can even use your ult to TP out when your escape route is cut off. If they try to force a 5v4 on the rest of your team instead, well, again, you can use your ult to instantly TP to the fight. This playstyle is very similar to the standard carry split pushers like Tryndamere and Fiora, but with a bit of a trade-off. While those champions may push and take towers a little faster than you, having the ability to instantly group and prevent your team from being wiped is definitely a trade-off that I like, especially given how solo queue players don't quite understand the phrase "don't get caught while I push out the lane." And our other OP top laner for this patch is Camille. She's absolutely a champ that has to be played well in order to be considered OP. Just playing her okay usually results in a completely useless teammate. But when you can use her kit with perfect precision, true to her character, she's an insanely strong top laner that can easily become a 1v9 machine. To start off, many top laners have a very specific way of playing the game. They either play back, go for the sustained game, look for short trades, or commit all-ins without too much overlap. But with Camille, she can actually play every matchup differently, mixing and matching different lane styles depending on her lane opponent. For example, against a weaker lane, she can easily commit to a fight, dashing in with her E and just chasing them down the lane. If you're really good at comboing with Camille, you can even time her W so that the empowered part lands as you're E'ing into your target. You run them down with Qs and autos until they're back at turret, and after a few good trades, you can even dive with your ult. But in harder matchups, you may need to keep it short and sweet, using Q on a minion, then using E into your opponent, and using your second Q for a big true damage trade. And then of course running back before they retaliate. In the hardest lanes, such as Darius, using your E in for short trades is suicide. Your stun just doesn't last long enough, so he'll pull you back in after it wears out, and with no hookshot available, now you're dead. So in those times, you'll completely swap to a defensive style, using your W to slowly win a sustained battle instead, and only reserving your E as an escape. One extra note here is that Camille is already pretty good against tanks, but with the new Divine Sunderer buff on this patch, she's even better. You can now build that mythic over Trinity Force to smash tanks better than ever. For a long time now, Camille's been tearing up high elo, but when you look at her overall win rate, it's actually pretty average, and that's largely why we don't see many nerfs coming in for what I consider to be a pretty oppressive champ. The reason for this is that her kit is just so difficult for lower elo players to learn and fully master, so if you find yourself in that position, you can always check out ProGuides.com and chat with any of our Challenger level coaches who will walk you through everything you need to know about the pick. From how to play out laning phases against specific matches, to what you need to be doing in the mid to late game. Learning from our coaches will not only make you better at Camille, but just a better top laner in general. We even got a discount code RANKUP2021 to cut 20% off of the price of a subscription if you sign in today. So go check it out if you haven't already. Now taking a look at the jungle, our first pick is Lee Sin. While he is seeing a nerf on this patch, that nerf really only affects lane Lee Sin, and even then, only mildly so. From a pro play perspective, the point of nerfing lane Lee Sin means that the pick is weaker as a whole, because it loses some value as a flex pick, but I don't think this is enough to get him out of that role either. Anyway, though we're not talking about the lane Lee Sins, we're talking about jungle. So this season, the focus has been very strongly on gank-heavy junglers, and with the 11.10 changes to jungle adding catch-up experience back to the game, that agenda's just been pushed even harder. Catch-up experience basically means you can just turn your brain off and go for non-stop ganks, then go back and clear whatever camps you can before getting right back to ganking. Before, that mindless style of play would mean putting 100% of your faith in your teammates. Even if you were fed, being down 3 or 4 levels means that you're nowhere near as strong as the enemy jungler. But in this meta, you'll be down a single level at most, and maybe not even behind at all if the enemy jungler isn't heavily counter-jungling you. So with a super high early damage and ability to duel just about anyone he needs to in the jungle in a 1v1, Lee Sin will continue to be the king of the role. As far as builds go, you can go a bit more aggressive, picking up a Death Stance over Guardian Angel, or even getting a Cyrilda's in your build to break the tanks. And if you need an MR, you can also pick up Sphere of Visage over Chainsword. If you want better 1v1 dueling because your team likely won't be team fighting anyway, or the entire enemy team is squishy, you can also go for Eclipse over Gore Drinker just for that better burst damage. And our other OP jungler is somebody I am very upset that they're making me talk about, Shaco, but specifically his AD build. AP Shaco is taking a bit of a hit with the AP ratio being lowered just a tad on both his W and E, but that's still pretty viable too. But AP Shaco isn't OP because it completely nukes the enemy team. It's OP because of the consistent damage output and box spamming, making it impossible for the enemy team to force engages and dive into your backline. But still, a nerf is a nerf, and it did lose a bit of carrying power, and AD Shaco has always been the more solo carry build anyway, so that's what we have for you here. Something to note is that you do kind of need to get fed early to be strong, but when you do, you'll be one-shotting any squishy target that you get a hold of. And given how strong his ganks are early game, if you're good at pathing and know which lanes to target, odds are you'll be fed in most of your games. And once you get a lead, you'll never be looking for direct 5v5s. Instead, you should be hanging out for a few seconds at the start of the fight, waiting for the enemy team to tunnel in on the rest of your team. It's extremely rare for an entire team to try and focus on watching out for somebody that isn't even seen by wards, so as soon as you see the enemy AD carry or a squishy mage standing just a little far from the rest of their team, poof in with your Q and go for the insta-gib. And this style of play is pretty much what you'll rinse and repeat for the rest of the game. Even though you aren't AP, you'll still spam your boxes in areas that you're fighting around, since the fear and a bit of vision they provide is still super useful. And when people aren't grouped up around objectives, you'll constantly make plays for picks. When you're fed on Shaco, you should be punishing any squishy champ that tries to rotate through the jungle or even farm in a side lane by themselves. Now moving on to our mid laners, we'll start things off with Sylas. Sylas seems to always float back and forth on the mid lane tier list, and even now with no direct changes other than just the bug fixes for the past 5 patches, he's risen back to the very top. His lane phase is either good or great in pretty much every matchup, with him having the AoE damage from his Q and passive to shove in most opponents. Anyone that tries to contest him in lane, you can pretty easily trade on. His trades are pretty easy to pull off too, as long as you can land his chain, so just gap close with E, then use W and some passive autos. Since you'll be maxing W, you'll be chunking out your lane opponent hard, while also healing up almost all the damage that they do to you, resulting in massively won trades once you get some AP rolling. But the crazy thing is lane phase isn't even where Sylas shines. That strong trading also makes him a very oppressive side laner. Since you're stacking up a ton of ability haste, you will be spamming Ws, meaning that you can heal through the damage of pretty much anyone that can burst you down in one go. And against the right opponents, Sylas is an insane team fighter. A full tank Malphite's ult may be a great way to set up the rest of his team to win fights, but since you're building full AP on Sylas, that ult turns into a massive AoE nuke that can allow you to solo wipe the entire enemy backline. Also, as a little bonus tip, if you're ever against a Cho'Gath, take his ult every single time you can and use it to eat a minion or monster. You keep the bonus HP from the ability, and since you're a melee bruiser that has to get in the middle of team fights, you'll take any extra durability that you can. And our second mid this patch is Zed. Being an assassin means that a lot of his success hinges on getting fed early and snowballing that lead to carry games. But of all the melee assassins in the current meta, he arguably has the most oppressive laning, so securing that lead is pretty easy to consistently do. The reason for that is how easy it is for a good Zed to win against other laners, all while being safe against jungle ganks. That's because Zed gets to sit back and trade with his Q poke, and when you want to go in for even bigger trades, you can send out your W to help out. Landing both shurikens and your E procs electrocute, so you can trade heavily from out of harm's way, even against ranged champs. And yeah, other melee champions may have strong trading. I'm looking at Qiyana, Fizz, and Talon, who can definitely beat most other champs in 1v1s if they get onto them, but the issue is they have to go in to take trades. Misplaying means that you take a lot of damage back for free and also leaves you open to jungle ganks. But with Zed, since you're sitting back, you don't actually have to deal with any of that. But Zed isn't just some poke mage. The whole point of this poke is to get your laner low enough so that you can go for the all-in. Your kill threshold will depend on your items, so you'll just have to learn that as you practice him. But you can pretty much kill most opponents if you have them around half HP with a full combo. And once you get that first kill, like I said before, you will start snowballing insanely hard, able to kill your opponent every single time that your ult and ignite are up. And from that point, you'll just look to take over games in the mid stages. If the enemy team doesn't have a great duelist, you can probably side lane against just about everyone. Even tanks can't 1v1 Zed when you itemize to kill them. Just pick up a Black Cleaver somewhere in the build for when you're against an armor-heavy opponent. In team fights, Zed's W and R mean that reaching backline carries, no matter how far back they try and sit, is pretty easy. And with your R causing you to go untargetable, it's really hard for the enemy team to actually stop you once you get a good angle on them. Just be sure to combo quick and then reactivate your ult to blink back where you were before getting hit by incoming CC. Now moving things down to the bot lane, our first OP AD carry is Jhin. He's pretty much the bane of all other AD carry, countering even Caitlyn, who is the go-to pick when you just want a hard win lane phase. That said, he isn't a champ that you can just run at your opponents with, a la Draven or Lucian. With Jhin, you need to execute your trades with some care, looking for Q bounces and fighting around your 4th shot for optimal damage. As soon as your 4th shot is spent, use the speed boost to kite away from any returning fire that your opponent tries to dish out. In a lot of ways, his trading pattern kinda feels like Misfortune. You want to keep Scuffle short and sweet, at least in the early game. And once you have some items and more levels in your spells, your trading becomes strong enough that you can instead use the movement speed to continue the chase as you reload. Or you can just open up your ult and finish them off that way. Aside from his super strong laning, Jhin is also a surprisingly self-sufficient AD carry outside of lane phase. While he may not have true mobility like a dash or a blink, the insane movement speed that he gets later in the game from building up more crit chance, as well as his slows en route, make it fairly easy to kite most threats. And that's assuming that he has to run in the first place, because aside from tanks, Jin's massive AD stat usually means an opponent is dead before they even have a chance to damage you. Like I said though, the one weakness Jhin has is taking down super beefy targets on his own. His super slow attacks are the cause of that. But if your teammates can get a tank low enough, 4th shot's execute damage can easily finish off even the super tanks. Just be sure that you pick up Lord Dominic's regards earlier in your build when you're having to deal with the thicker frontliners. Now both in lore and in game, Jhin is a sick character. His slow, methodical style is a nice change-up from the standard marksman, and it's a great example of a champion feeling like their identity. So that brings us to today's question of the day. Who's your favorite character in the game? This isn't about who feels the most OP or who your favorite is to win with. We just want to know what champion satisfies those fantasy elements the best. I got a soft spot for Bard because I think it's just hilarious having this super powerful wandering caretaker, celestial bodied guy, weirdo clown thing flying around and, going on adventures and stuff. But that's my answer. Let me know yours in the comments below. So our other OP AD carry for this patch is actually Tristana. With burst damage, it can basically solo kill other squishy champs. Even in the first few levels, Tristana is a great champ for snowballing and hard carrying games. But with her range increasing passive, she also has amazing scaling as a hyper carry for later in the game. She also has crazy mobility with her resetting jumps range, allowing her to easily reposition for safety or better damage output. And she even has self-peeling with her ult. TLDR, she can snowball super hard, play to scale as a hyper carry, and she's incredibly self-sufficient, so you don't have to pray that your teammates are competent, which in solo queue is a very nice bonus. In lane, you won't always be able to use her high burst to just jump in though. If your support isn't able to play that style, or you're against a champion like Thresh or Braum that can actually negate what you're trying to do, you'll usually just be leaping to your death. But you aren't just suddenly out of options here. In those cases, instead focus on shoving in waves, which is pretty easy thanks to your E's passive. Once you have your opponent under tower, you look to use your E on the turret. The bonus range on the explosion radius when it's used on turrets means that you're taking plates and doing a solid amount of damage to your opponents. Everyone loves a 2 birds 1 stone deal. And outside of lane, you should really try to play Tristana aggressively, especially if you have a lead. I'd say that anytime after 2 items, and especially after 3, you can 1v1 just about any champ. Even assassins won't deal with Tristana well, since she can just use her ult to knock them away the second that they get on top of her. In fact, there are times you'll be playing Tristana like an assassin herself. If you see the other AD carry or some other vulnerable carry trying to farm a side lane, make your way to them, jump over the wall, and just 100-0 them. Aside from that, you'll of course play her in team fights, kind of like any other AD carry. You'll mainly be going the front to back approach, but if you see a chance to use your jump to take out a higher priority target, just go for it. But make sure that you're confident you'll get the kill. If you jump in too deep and don't get a reset, you're just as easy to kill as any other marksman. Rounding things out with supports, our first pick is Lulu. For whatever reason, Riot actually buffed her on 11.9 when she was already considered the best enchanter and a contender for top support. Since then, other top tier supports have been hit with little nerfs here and there, and she's clearly at the top now. I can tell you, I have been abusing the hell out of this pick. On top of that, there's also been a couple of enchanter items buffed on this patch too. Shirelles is still definitely better on Lulu than Moonstone, but the buff to Staff of Flowing Water, though small, is a welcome one that she can appreciate. But what really makes Lulu so good is that she doesn't really have a weak point in the game. Most other enchanters are scaling picks focused on strong team fighting, and the ones that are good early, like Nami and Karma, generally fall off as the game goes on. But Lulu doesn't have to choose one or the other. Her trading in lane is really strong, mostly due to the added damage that she gets on her auto attacks from picks. Even against aggressive lanes, you can use Polymorph and Shield to negate most of the other laners' damage, and then turn the fight in favor of you and your AD carry. Oh, and once out of lane, you can take a more true supportive role, sticking with your AD carry and just keeping them safe, while massively buffing their damage output. Jinx and Kog'Maw already do a lot of damage on their own, but when you add in Ardent Sensor's attack speed and on-hit damage, Lulu's Whimsy attack speed, and the extra damage from picks, their DPS goes off the charts. That said, you don't just want to be one of those mindless enchanter players that uses everything on the AD carry right at the start of the fight and prays that they carry the fights. Against certain champs, mostly divers and assassins, you'll want to time your ultimate to knock them up when they go in. You'll also sometimes need to hold your W's cooldown to shut down an opponent instead of buffing your AD carry, if they're a particularly high damage threat. Even the most fed champion is not a danger when they're a squirrel, cupcake, or whatever your skin makes them. And finishing off our list, we have Thresh. As we predicted, being nerfed 3 times in the last few patches just wasn't enough to see him kicked out of the top tier. He's just too damn well rounded as a champion. Being a jack of all trades is usually a big weakness in League, because it's better to specialize in 1 or 2 areas and do them really well rather than spreading thin to do a lot of things poorly. But with Thresh, that's just not an issue. He can make picks, play for peel, or just be a disruptive force in teamfights, and he does it all super well. On top of that, his most valuable asset is absolutely his lantern. If you got a flashless Jinx and the enemy team has Rumble Jarvan, she's basically guaranteed dead against their ults. But when you add in Thresh to the equation, Jinx is safe as can be. Just make sure that in cases like this, you sit back so that your teammates actually get some safe distance when they use the lantern. Now, I know that's a specific scenario, but there's so many situations that you can use Thresh to enable your allies, and more importantly, deny your opponents. For example, with smart positioning and good reflexes, you can actually use Flay to completely prevent champs that rely on long-range jumps and dashes to engage fights, such as Camille, Zac, or Lee Sin. Also, swapping from defense to offense, you can lantern in teammates from further back to get them in a better spot for an engage. And of all the hook champs, Thresh is maybe the most damning to be hit by. With enough ability haste and the cooldown refunded from landing it, you can literally chain CC your target to death with it. Just make sure to assess the enemy team comp and see whether you need to play more aggressive or defensive in fights, and then position accordingly. As always, it's way easier to react to things when you're ready for them.
And that's it for OP Picker Ban 11.11 edition. Really hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure you sub to the channel so you never miss out on our meta guides and you're always in the loop of what the best picks are. Remember to let me know what character you like the most from League's roster down in the comments below. And one last thing, don't forget to check out the Discord in the description box below where you can enter our giveaways or just hang out and be part of the community. Can't wait to see you back in the next video, but until then, best of luck on the Rift, everybody. Stay hydrated, and I'll see you next time.